Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This evening, I'm going to be continuing my reaction to Kronan de Cannon. This was a request from Mitch7235, and the Kronan de Cannon playlist is created on the Baldermort Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel. Yes, last time I reacted to Kronan de Cannon was last year, and Kronan had, conquered Aquilonia. He has solidified his authority, his power within the Ork horde that's based on Aquilonia. And yeah, I think his next objective is to conquer, the stars as much as possible so that he can get the attention of the Imperium of Man's most powerful warriors, the Custodians. That's one of his big dreams, to fight against the golden warriors of the Emperor. So yeah, he just has to gain the notoriety, he has to gain the power, and I'm sure the Imperium of Man will take notice of him, and they will be sending their most powerful warriors against him. Yeah. So tonight's episode, I should say, that I'm reacting to is Legend of Kronan Bug Swatting. Yes. If you guys want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. Remember, if you want to check out my previous reactions to Kronan de Cannon playlist, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top right here to see my reactions. And yes, let us start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Kronan, wearer of the jeweled crown of Aquilonia, upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. And so it was that we rejoin our hero, Kronan, the Cunning One.
Wait, hold on. Where is the introductory music? I missed that introduction music. Oh gosh. Maybe it's still coming because it's still, the beginnings of the video, so probably it will come, hopefully. But yeah, it was cool, seeing Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer, and then the fire in the background, and then the music. Amazing. Okay.
Lord of all of Aquilonia. And to be frank, or earnest, which is usually more politique, he was growing to be more than just a single-system ruler now. For in all of the hurly-burly of relating his most close-up camera shots, the fuel-injected high adventure that we have all come to adore. Anyways, it is freely admitted that even a chronicler as well acquainted with the source material as I must needs omit some details. I mean, it's not like I share my cataloguing of every one of the mighty Kronan's anal exhales, which now stands at 20,323.
Anal exhales? Okay.
From the first entry, just for the record. But I dare say sharing my meticulously annotated spreadsheets on the force, bouquet, reach and staying power of said body burps,
my gosh,
would scant add anything to this retelling of a tale of such magnificence. Just know there is always more for me to relate. In fact, probably more happens off-screen than on. But the nature of storytelling is getting to the good bits, as all else is.
And the things that build up to the good bit. That's also very important. Yeah.
For the long, tedious tales of the Humies and the Smeldar.
Smeldar, okay. Let me write that down here. Smeldar and the Humies.
who literally have nothing better to do with their time. I mean, honestly, if one of these foul and noxious runty races can spend resources on supporting anything more than one chronicler at a time, then it clearly shows a lack of prioritization skills, and would go a long way to explaining why the Humies and the Smeldar were so absolutely rubbish at fighting.
Well, they have civilizations to upkeep and civilizations to foster and to survive. They're not like the Orks with their lives just purely existing for conflict, So, yeah, of course, they'll be different. They won't be as strong as the Orks in terms of combat and fighting and, building war machines and heading off to war immediately without respite.
Because their utmost import in any engagement was the defraying of casualties in any, fray. And they were missing the point entirely. It would be like spending entire decades to become a fry cook on a world with replicators. It would be like many a chopper made by an immature boy. Pointless, yet obviously not redundant. Well, at least not in that situation, as it could be used as a cudgel, which effectively would just elongate any scrap. Hence, it was always a boon to any youth, as it meant that they would have to put in more willy to get the job done, and a gratuitous application of elbow grease was the key to most good bundles. But the runty races would never understand. These unspeakable killjoys had no
Unspeakable killjoys.
idea what a good war was even about. Not really. I mean, the Smeldar were okay at killing things. That could not be denied. And there are starters of the Humies.
Starters.
The Space Marines. Well, they were particularly shooty, choppy, and stabby. Very fighty. But Kronan again considered that the R-starters must have more Ork in them than Humie. You see, the Smeldar, Humies, and Toe Empire all shared the same singular issue. They were far too goal-oriented. Defend this base, stop that fleet, protect this city, stop this massacre, prevent that genocide, etc., etc., and on and on.
Yeah, well, they don't really live for the battle. They live to survive. And of course, they're goal-orientated. They have to maintain positions of strength. Unlike the Orks, where anywhere and everywhere is free game. They can do whatever they want. They can be wherever they want. They can do whatever they please. Their heart's desires, their nature is to fight. So, of course, they'll be different from the Smeldar and the Humies. The Smeldar and the Humies don't really have the same sort of connection to scrapping like the Orks. Yeah.
They never took the time to really smell the roses. Not that any Ork would put it like that, but the statement is manifestly self-evident nonetheless. And as any good proper greenskid knew, when it came to fighting, it really was all about the participation. Anyway,
you gotta be in that party. If you're not in that party, then can you really call yourself an Ork? Can you really call yourself an Ork if you're not in that party? Nah.
This all adds up to the confirmation that I am not pestering or overburdening the patience of my audience with endless pre-correlated details of little worth. Although I am aware that some gain gargantuan mahogany, redwood or oak tent poles from the discussion of logs and sticks, it is still something I tend to skirt over. Not that I am stating that skirts are a particularly important part of this tale, as they are clearly not. I have not even rizzed Admiral Tartan or McMurdo for their strangely kilt-like attire, which everyone else...
McMurdo wears a kilt? Really? McMurdo with the big, mechanical arm? Okay, wow.
Outside of Malt Whiskey Land realizes is just a plaited skirt. And so it was that elements of Kronan's war were getting antsy at times. despite the extravagant, gaudily lavish entertainments laid on by Kronan's Mystery of Truth. Some were indeed grinding their teeth with inaction. And as teeth were the universally accepted currency for the greenskins, this was viewed by the Cunning One as a potential threat to his economy.
Yeah, imagine all those teeth are now damaged because, the Orks, they want to fight, but they can't fight because there's no fight to have, and they just become frustrated, and the most valuable assets in their mouths are slowly being degraded by their inaction. So yeah, it'll be bad for the economy of the Orks.
Again, since the debacle of the Stock Exchange, we have nary even mentioned the fiscus, the finances of the war, because it is tedious, and doth not contain either spittle, struggle, or slaughter.
Yeah, if there's no scrap in it, let's not talk about it. That's things that the war boss has to worry about in his own personal time. It's not our time to worry about that. Nah. We're just here for the scraps.
Hence, it has been omitted. Sidebar. Multitasking. Ha! See? I remembered, so I thought I'd get it in quick. Now I have time for this exceptional sidebar, as I did not wish to clutter the last chapter, for it can be difficult to remain on point during such a thoroughly chaotic narrative. But one would not expect anything but the most cunning of linguistics to lick out such an important anal. The ongoing exploits of the Cunning One, Kronan. Ergo, which is rarely heard these days, we get to the sidebar proper. For multitasking is yet another skill, facility, mighty power of the most orky of orcs. Now Kronan was all too aware of the import of his time, as has been mentioned earlier. Hence the institution of the rule of 3 so many moons ago, which really did diminish the amount of boss botherers who now attempted to court his favour. But with first contact rituals and other such matters perpetually on his docket, Kronan's time was even more at a premium than ever before. Thus, even in rare repose, Kronan would be perpetually observing the universe around him, and this, of course, would lead on to being attacked by ideas. And so, Kronan learnt of multitasking while enjoying the matinee Squig surprise event.
So, is Kronan getting used to thinking? Because I know in the past, he found it, a bit difficult and a bit dangerous to start thinking, formulating plans, understanding his enemies, and then executing the plans. Is he now getting used to thinking, now that he's also, developed the skill of multitasking? Yeah. Well, he has to. He's now running a large empire of orcs, throughout the stars. And that type of organization needs a very astute commanding officer. You can't just be a war boss in your tent, enjoying eating grots and think that everything is going to be fine. Like the orcs are just going to automatically do everything. No, you need a hands-on approach. So you got to start thinking more often.
For the Lord of Orks marvelled at not only the sheer carnage that arose as soon as the grots were teleported into the giant Squigoth pens, but also the economy of action. And Kronan looked on agape as he witnessed the amount of grots the mighty Squigoths could exterminate in such a short time frame. Their every movement slew scores of the grots, a foot falling on many, other grots being thrown into walls by the impact, others
Oh, those poor creatures. I still feel for the grots,
in their wide-eyed screeching to be free of the enclosed area would slam themselves against the walls. As Kronan watched the impaling of 4 grots on the one horn, the lumen in his head flickered on. For he now knew he had to be as a Squigoth's fury. He had to watch his life for opportunities to deal with multiple issues at the same time. Multitasking. Thus did Kronan set to utilizing his time to its absolute optimum. For example, If Kronan was to chastise one of his bosses, he would invite all those who he was even slightly dubious about. Hence, when he tore the head off the rare annoying malcontent, he would also quell many a subsequent rising by making an exhibition of the recalcitrant knob or boss. Strangely, it seemed to really put the loyalty back into his mobs and knobs when he went to town on one of said miscreants. And thus, ironically, proving the ancient Smeldar axiom, it is easier to kill two stoners with one bird, or something like that.
No, and it's a Humi saying, it's not an Eldar saying, or Smeldar saying, it's a Humi saying, you know, kill two birds with one stone, not not kill two stonies with one bird, nah.
In any case, Kronan was now a master of multitasking, and the war thrived due to it. End sidebar. But where was I going with all this? Oh yes, that Kronan had been canny indeed, for he had sent off the most rambunctious of his flotillas to grab extra turf. Well, the systems themselves were of little use to Kronan at this stage, as he was fully intent on his war, and, like many a leader, he concentrated on that which would maintain his forward momentum, and thus popularity with the masses. Yet, inside, even the cunning one had an eye to the future. Well, more on askance shifty gods every now and again. But Kronan did ponder that if he did pull all of this off and succeeded in his war, well, it might be nice to have an empire to come back to for a break, obviously, before then setting off on his next campaign of utter carnage.
Yeah, I was a bit worried there, because if you take a break as a war boss, you'll become weak, you'll become complacent. The other orcs will see you as being weak. You know, you can't take a break. You must always keep fighting to grow bigger, to grow stronger, to be even more fearsome and menacing than any orc that has lived before. If you want the Imperium of Man to take notice of you, you gotta really just keep fighting until they come with the Golden Warriors. There can be no rest. And Aqualonia as your capital, I agree. if that's the plan, to make Aqualonia your capital, yes, do so. That's where it all started for you.
Also, as we have heard in the sidebar concerning booty, status was indeed a very important thing amongst the bosses of any truly orky congregation. And so it was that Kronan had taken to sending his most dense, independent, or incompetent war bosses off on their own little side missions, and most were utterly ineffective, and were nary.
Well, it's separating the weak from the strong, cleaning house of the incompetent and leaving the competent behind. You know, people like Daka von Smashhoven, I remember him, and of course McMurder, and there was someone else, I forgot who he was. But yeah, you know, have those bosses who are extremely competent in their job to stay behind, and those who are incompetent, clean out.
Heard from again. Yet, even amongst the sorry bunch that Kronan had sent out, there seemed to be a few unlikely winners. Well, more to put it, that there were a few who were not led by total grot-lickers. For the mustering of this mighty scrap being held somewhere in the sector had indeed denuded the vast majority of the Humi worlds from any real backbone. Once upon a time, a planetary deference farce, you know, the local Humi fighters. Well, more like part-timers really, but in any case.
Who, the PDF forces?
They were still present, and would usually have been able to resist most Orky assaults. Yet, with the guidance of an excellent example, that paragon of battle and victory, Kronan de Cunning, some of the ne'er-do-wells had actually played a blinder. Hence, as Kronan messed about with the Goliath Spacehawk, the Orks of Omen, he was hardly sitting with his thumbs up his butt.
The Orks of Omen. Okay.
No. He had been conquering everywhere for light years around. It's just that no real resistance of the magnitude to justify an actual description of events was in the offing. Needless to say, Kronan was well pleased with every single victory, heralding them through the mystery of truth, while utterly suppressing the many myriad of total cock-ups that had occurred across the sector. Like, who would really need the nitty-gritty about the self-crumping of Sigma Delta Theta 15, where the entire massed greenskins had mistakenly appeared on two ends of the planet, only to think the other side indigenous non-speed war orcs. Hence, they butchered each other to the last greenskin.
What in the hell? What in the hell? Like, what? What? You guys are supposed to recognize each other like, oh, okay, we both come from, the Orc Horde of Kronan. How is it possible that you guys don't know each other? And then you start fighting against each other? That's crazy. Hey, Orcs.
Neither side willing to forfeit the victory in the name of the Cunning One, even when they started calling their enemy by their names whilst mid-clash. Nor would the tale of the mega-whoops of Wankanda 2 be worthy of dissemination. For this particularly goofy event underlined the import of coordinating landing sites for major transports.
And this is why Kronan has to develop these skills, the multitasking, the organization skills. You know, he has to really understand on how to maintain his horde, because these bosses, the incompetent ones, or, you know, even the mobs, not mobs, knobs, sorry. You know, even the knobs, they're just going to destroy each other. They're just going to mess up everything. So Kronan has to have a hands-on approach to everything. He can't just delegate such responsibilities to the bosses alone. He also has to be at the forefront.
Only truly being learnt when over 24 attack ships of the line all headed for the same strip of open space before the Humi's capital city. Alas, the many speed freaks in charge of the flying of said transports saw absolutely no reason why they should surrender their obvious right of way. Hence, the landing strip soon looked like a multi-story car park populated by burning wrecks. Obviously, it was a truly side-splitting spectacle to view, yet not exactly the kind of result the Cunning One would laud. And it was also something that the mere mention of would send Ducker von Smashhoven into paroxysms of rage. So,
it's good to hear that he's still alive and he's still in the cabinet of Kronan. Yeah, I think like the top 3 generals, right?
Kronan had the evidence removed and the mystery on the hunt for gabblers and grumblers. You know, blabbermouths. Yet, even amongst these utter fripperies, there were potential concerns. The first was the defiance of one particular world. It made even less sense to Kronan than usual, for this planet was barely of note, hardly defended, and mostly, well, pointless really. Yet, even after 3 assaults, it had held firm.
Wow, the PDF forces on that planet must be very good.
None could quite understand why so many of the boys had been exterminated quite so quickly when there was so little obvious resistance. Kronan decided that the very first place he would visit with his brand new wonderful sheep, the Orks of Omen, would be this strangely resilient, fern-festooned world of Ramalama Ding Dong 4.
Ramalala Ding Dong. Oh my gosh. Okay. Ramalala Ding Dong 4. Wow. Is that the orc name of the system and the planet, or is that, you know, the Imperium of Man designating the planet as Ramalama Ding Dong 4? My gosh.
The second issue was by far the more grating, for more than a few orc raiding forces had been sliced to ribbons by Smeldar ships. They would come out of nowhere and ripped Kronan's formations to pieces whenever they ventured too far west in the sector.
Are these the Corsairs?
Kronan knew without a shadow of doubt that this could only mean that they were infringing on the space lanes of that redoubtable scoundrel and Smeldar pirate admiral, Yanes Blonde.
Wait, Eldars use space lanes? I thought they used the webway to transport themselves, from system to system. I didn't know that they also use the warp. I thought they use webway portals. Or maybe, wherever these transport lanes are, there is a webway portal that they have to access and exit out and do something. I don't know. But okay, that sounds interesting.
Another whelp for the breaking. Another chapter in the glorious chronicles of the Cunning One. Now Kronan had already assigned Admiral Hackbar to be
Hackbar.
The first part of his larger plans, so he was definitely busy, as he would be setting off as soon as a dozen rocks were ready. Yet, in Kronan's estimation, Grandmouth Tartan did indeed require a bit more experience, commanding a fleet the size of the Cunning Wars.
Grandmouth Tartan.
When this fern-strewn world was finally brought under his power, Kronan swore that he would bring this piratic parasite to bay, and then tear off his limbs, splash his blood to the four winds, then jump up and down on the bits before feeding them to Tiddles, who Kronan could then watch expel from his posterior only hours later.
Tiddles! The best squig ever. The best squig ever. The loyal companion of Kronan. Loyal to death. Loyal to love. Respect. Whatever. It's Tiddles.
Now all of that is said and done. The overall update given as usual. Let us progress to the prime cuts of the matter. The battle against the Terrorkids. The busting of the Buggins.
The Terrorkids. Oh, the Terranids. Okay, wow. Interesting name. Terrorkids. Terror Kids. The Bugs. Okay.
A war to claim the guts of the Orks of Omen. For, as we have heard last time, Kronan had broken the initial assault forces into a trident of terror. 3 war bosses for the 3 prongs of the attack. One headed up by the ever-vicious but ever-loyal
McMurder.
Git Squisher McMurder. The second ostensibly led by that weasel, Grinner the Backstabber.
Ah, yes, Grinner the Backstabber. Okay, wait, let me write down the bosses again. McMurder. Okay. Grinner the Backstabber. Yeah, I remember him. Kronan doesn't like you very much.
And the last was posthumously under the command of Tragic Violence.
Tragic Violence. I don't remember you. Yeah, I don't remember you, Tragic Violence, but okay. Must be new. Let me see, boss.
A bit of a Johnny-come-lately, who was the cat-pain generous of the Legion. Tragic had been shot out by a Triantaflex. The ball of purple power that slapped the cat-pain in the mush also was strong enough to turn his entire upper half into smush.
Oh, so he's dead.
Hence the third prong of the attack was now literally headless, and it was Kronan, who would now barge in to lead this group of green-skinned warriors before the Buggins could surround, slaughter, and snaffle the lot.
Oh, okay, well, I guess I can just scratch out your name, Tragic Violence. You're no longer needed here. And welcome, Kronan, to the battlefield.
And so it was that Kronan took shuttle across to the Orks of Omen at the head of a couple of hundred of his bodyguard.
That's actually a very nice name for a ship. Orks of Omen.
the mega-armor nutters of his legion.
The Black Legion.
Yet it was to prove less straightforward than that, for in Kronan's train was of course his pet squig, Tiddles. Now this caused a very strange affair indeed, for the squigs were usually seen wandering about the place, and nobody oft took any notice of them until they were either hungry or being chewed on by a particularly aggressive wee ball of dental destruction. Yet this had also been changing. It seemed to be another side effect of the blessings of Mork. Yet another sign of the bounty of the god of cunning brutality unto Kronan.
That's cool. That's really cool. So Mork is still giving Kronan blessings and probably also Tiddles blessings. But what about Gork? You know, brutal and cunning. Why not also Gork giving Kronan some support? But, you know, having Mork on your side is still good too. In fact, he actually needs Mork more than Grok, definitely.
The proliferation of the grots was one thing. The increase in the size of those who were closest to Kronan another. The sheer exhibitions of thinking yet another. But now, it seemed, a greater blessing had just begun, for it passed as odd originally. But those who follow the chronicles with avid ears and cunning of their own will realize there was something very special about this squig. Tiddles was now of a size to even growl at a squigoth and not fear. Oh, the chances of him being anything but squashed into a pate by one was still astronomical. But it was a simple fact that Tiddles was now the largest baseline squig any had ever seen.
Damn, Tiddles!
And he had also been augmented by the strategic sewing of multiple mad boys to his posterior. Or
Mad boys to the posterior? Why? And mad boys, they are the... No, that's the weird boys that are psychers, right? So what are mad boys? I forgot. Oh, alright.
done during the preparation for the battle against Toba and the worshippers of the wimpy gods of chaos. But the problem was that these mad boys, they seemed to have been absorbed into Tiddles. And it became obvious to all that something was now going on with Tiddles. For he was able to transport himself where he should not be, had no logical or even orky way of getting to the places he did. And
Okay, so the mad boys are psychers, like the weird boys. And it seems that Tiddles has absorbed them and is able to use warp knowledge or warp techniques to teleport himself from one point to another. That's interesting. Does he use the warp to teleport, or does he just teleport, instantaneously?
There had been reports of him appearing inside people's rooms and attempting to snaffle them. Well, the reports were more just evidence, really, for none survived his nocturnal snacking. Yet the evidence was overwhelming, mostly because it was a pile of dung that was not born of any normal orc body. And it left an odour so foully overwhelming as to only be possible from either the Great One himself or his huge and perpetually hungry squig, Tiddles. But more than this, the other squigs acted differently when Tiddles was amongst them.
Tiddles is now the war boss of the squigs. He is the war boss.
Their fightiness and bitiness were sent skyrocketing. They would surround him and follow him wherever he went. As Kronan was unto the boys, Tiddles was unto the squigs.
Exactly.
And, strangely, quite a few snots as well. Go figure. When Kronan's sheep landed on one of the many bays of the Orks of Omen, the furore was real. Kronan walked down the gangplank, with other transports blurting out scores of his mega-armoured knobs. But as soon as the massive squig Tiddles appeared beside him, the bays were hit by a tsunami of bitey balls of hate, all wagging and waiting for their own master, Tiddles.
Man, that must be a sight to see. That really must be a sight to see.
The avatar of teeth, to show them the way. Now, on his procession to the place of pain, old Kronan was watching the feeds from the many vidgrots he had sprinkled amongst the usual ways of the diminutive wretches, and thus he felt like a front-row spectator in the carnage, for the groups were performing pretty much as expected, but not anything beyond the scope of the ken of the Lord of the Cunning War, Kronan. For he predicted that the forces under the late, and definitely not great, tragic violence would be in trouble, and that they were. For the Buggins had smelt their discord, their lack of central control, and their panic. Hence, they were now initiating a plethora of flanking and sweeping actions that would indeed cut the forlorn group from their reinforcements. Kronan would act swiftly and decisively as soon as he got there, of course. Yet the other two were now the main part of his concentration. And again, there was no surprise from those forces led by the whirlwind of destruction, Git Squisher McMurder. They were doing quite nicely, all things considered. Git Squisher had managed to retain some form of Orky order, which wasn't saying much, but it was enough for those closest to him to hear, understand, and disseminate the orders he was constantly screaming at his mobs. Not that this interrupted his wholehearted indulgence in gratuitous violence, because nothing could really prevent this from such an Orky orc as McMurder. Yet he was managing to hold his force together and get it where he wanted it to be, doing what he wanted it to do, which was, of course, the smashing of the Buggins.
A good scrap.
Kronan nodded his appreciation of the huge green merchant of death's generalship, as he then moved on to Grinner. Now Grinner the Backstabber had begun the event in such a way as to make Kronan question his evaluation of the previously very suspect Orc boss. For Grinner had practically ridden a wave of grots into the centre of a breaching zone, then stood his ground and pulverized scores of Buggins while holding out for his Flashkit guard to catch him up. Yet the moment of Orky goodness had now been replaced with a decidedly un-Orky set of events.
Oh, and what are those events?
For Kronan had been watching Grinner quite carefully, trying to be fair, for he did not like Grinner originally, and being betrayed by the wretch, well, that had not exactly enamoured Kronan to him. Yet in the time since that wee faux pas, Grinner had proven to be the most trusty of servants.
Yeah, trusty of servants, but he's still an enemy. You still have to keep an eye on him.
Also, he was always game for being the butt of many of Kronan's minor japes. Thus, Grinner had grown on the Lord of Cunning. Not like a wart, one of those nasty ones where the hair sticks out, nor like a mould or other fungi.
Ew.
Nor even like a rising damp patch that simply won't shift no matter how dry the room is or how much you treat it. No. He had grown on Kronan like a scar that reminded him of a particularly good scrap. Or more to put it, Kronan did not wish to disembowel Grinner whenever he turned around a corner and bumped into him accidentally. Yet, after accruing so many good boy points, Grinner now went about spending them as fast as possible. And his estimation in Kronan's eyes dropped radically. Of course, there was also the matter of the hat.
Oh no. Another orc wearing a hat? This is dangerous, guys. Orcs and hats should never be together. Especially if you're a war boss and you find another boss or another orc wearing a hat. Nah, you gotta deal with that person very fast. I don't know what's up with hats, but whenever an orc wears a hat, it's always... It's amazing. It's shockingly, scarily amazing how things just turn. Like, just one grot or a Gretchen would wear a hat and entire pandemonium and chaos would happen within that orc horde. You know, as these grots led by a Gretchen start a rebellion of some sort against the authority of the war boss and the knobs and whoever else. So yeah, an orc with a hat is very dangerous. I remember when Kronan was wearing a commissar's hat, and like he acquired a lot of thinking. So yeah, it's dangerous.
For Grinner's flash kits had shot out most of the grots near them in ludicrously unlucky events where the shooters just seemed to go off all by themselves whenever pointed at a Vit grot. Yet, there were always more, and it was from the remaining Vit grot feeds that Kronan could watch the strange goings-on of the backstabber. And it was deeply concerning for Kronan. Well, it would have been if he were anything other than an orc, for they do not really have concerns. More it was something that made Kronan want to flatten Backstabber, for he had something that Kronan did not. An odd thing.
The hat?
A strange thing. A magical hat. Now Kronan would have made his way to Grinner right then and there, if he had suspected that Grinner's headgear was of the sort to attract and concentrate thinking and ideas. Yet, this did not seem to be the case, for Kronan
for now
knew the exhaustion that would come from performing this most holy yet terribly dangerous practice. Hence, he was not perturbed. What Kronan was interested in was the nature of the hat. Why did it have green lights coming out of it that created some form of holographic map?
Green lights and a holographic map. Okay, this hat really, it has some sort of technology in it. Huh.
How did the hat know the layout of the Orks of Omen? How by Mork's buttocks did the hat know the layout of the Orks of Omen? Was Grinner using the hat? Was the hat, in fact, wearing Grinner?
We just don't have enough information to ascertain that just yet, but this is concerning. That there's a hat that is able to, scan the entire Orks of Omen and then make up a detailed digital map of the ship. It's got green lights coming out of it. No. I think it's some sort of artificial intelligence, maybe. Or virtual intelligence, but, very capable of assessing issues and giving information to the wearer of the hat.
A terrible revelation that caused Kronan to almost stop in his tracks. Luckily, the nudging from about 40 of his guards slamming into his back propelled Kronan forward again on his journey. Mused Kronan. This hat issue had to be resolved, and
indeed,
swiftly. For Grinner was using the hat to do very odd things. Grinner's main force was indeed heading forward down the usual routes, being the main corridors into the center of the space hulk. Yet Grinner and his entourage seemed to be going up ramps, down staircases, across empty rooms, in a convoluted squiggly way that had no rhyme or reason.
And they were not having any scraps with the bugs? Interesting.
Each time Grinner came to a fork in the road, he would consult his hat. And from it would come these green lights that made up the schematics. It seemed impossible. Before Kronan believed it was just pitiful luck for him to avoid all of the good fighting. But no, it was not. For Kronan could clearly make out that Grinner was. He was avoiding fights!
Oh, I thought he was going to say he's thinking. But yes, it is concerning that he's avoiding fights, That's what I was saying, he hasn't had a scrap ever since he was on board the Space Hulk and, continuing, going further and deeper into the Space Hulk. I mean, the Tyranids are here. Why aren't they attacking him? Clearly this hat, I don't know whether it is controlling him or he's controlling it. He is asking this hat suggestions on, what Backstabber should do. And I guess the hat is formulating plans for him. Maybe. Yeah. Very concerning.
Somehow, the scoundrel was ducking out of real scraps, and heading towards almost entirely clear zones which the Buggins had vacated to get to the battlefront. Disgusting.
That is not the Orkish way, backstabber.
The secret of the success of pirates. The helmet of Santango, the Endowed.
The helmet of Santango? Okay.
In an age mired in the sticky threads of ancient antiquity, most likely being about a decade ago, for the memory of the greenskins is shorter than a kin's sideburns after being hit by a blast from the furnaces. There was once a corsair of prodigious, natural talent, and he made common cause with the powers of the Emperor. For his part in the pact, Santango ever used his powers for destroying the clean, the flater, and the bitch. Yet Santango was also renowned for his prodigious, appetites. Hence he was gifted a power beyond the run-of-the-mill. For with his prophetic peen, he was able to predict the
Peen? What's that?
movements of his enemy. Not only did this really help with massive fleet engagements, but also in evading the existing paramours of his latest conquests when they eventually returned home. Thus, by using his peen's prophetic powers, could Santango the Endowed extricate himself from near any trap or ambush before it ever closed.
Wait, is this the hat? Oh, okay, alright.
Alas, the only time this did not work was when he met the forces of Yanes Blonde in open void war. For the Smeldar are far more adept at pulling back the foreskins of the future than any.
The what skins of the future? Oh my gosh, Baldermort.
Hume, even this most gifted and blessed of all pirates. Hence did Santango meet his match, which proved more than one, and as a result, Santango was forced onto his knees in defeat. It was with his small fruit-peeling blade that Jane's Blonde ended the connection betwixt the pirate and his powerful peen. Yet, when all was said and done, the Smeldar prince dropped the peen out of the nearest airlock. Long hours did it float, unknown, unowned, forever twitching to get back to its master. And by luck, it is just about then that a sheep of Grinner did meander into the region looking for scrap or a scrap. It was here that Grinner was guided to claim the prophetic member via its green lambent light. Yet he knew via a strangely transcendental dream that while he was known to possess the peen, he would never be able to live without looking over his shoulder. And considering his neck was incredibly short, and his shoulders were as huge as any other Ork war boss's, this could cause a severe lack of vision, one that would make him vulnerable forevermore. All would slay him for the powers of the peen.
And yeah, it's very dangerous, very powerful, very dangerous. Especially to the Ork who wears it. Because Kronan is going to take interest, which he is already. And I don't know whether he's going to kill you or he's going to try and just take it away from you. But prepare yourself for a fight. You're not going to avoid this one. Backstabber.
Unless he hid them. Unless he hid it. Hence did Grinner the Backstabber have created a fell garment indeed. The helmet of Santango the Endowed. A hat with an eye patch over a secret aperture, so it would only shine out its guidance when he wanted.
Oh, so he added extra aesthetics to the helmet for it to look like a hat with an eye patch. Okay.
And it was indeed Grinner's intention to dodge the main concentration of Buggins, as if they were an irate husband armed with a set of white-hot todger-removing tongs.
But the question is why? Why are you avoiding them?
Sidebar over. And so it was that Kronan entered the Terrakid factory. His mighty Leishan at his back. And it was not long before Kronan got to the very seat of the problem. The U-bend, the tragic violence, had simply not been able to flush. For there was the main corridor that had a Tryntaflex at its end. The huge buggin had a mighty shooter that had already accounted for tragic, but there was simply no way around it. Now Kronan was not alone, as we know, and a segment of his legion had already tried scouting ahead for love of their lord.
Love of their lord? I don't know about love. Maybe, yes, loyalty, because Kronan is the strongest and he is the war boss. But I don't know about love. But okay, alright, love. I would attribute love to Tiddles, not to any of these other orcs. No. To Tiddles, yes.
Alas, this meant that when Kronan and Tiddles snuck their heads round the corner to take a peek, or a shufti, they were greeted by the vista of a small shopping mall worth of smoking boots. To be fair, 1 or 2 sets were almost halfway down the corridor, and Kronan swelled with pride at the speed his mega-armoured knobs must have been booking it to get that far. Of course, Tiddles wanted to just charge down the corridor immediately, and there were a plethora of the balls behind him. In fact, the advent of Tiddles had begun to turn the tide all over the ship, for his minions, his fellow but lesser squigs, had now crawled into every air vent, conduit and catwalk.
A tsunami of squigs is about to appear, and the Tyranids won't be able to counter that.
Pouring into the Buggins-held region like a virus. There were clangs, and the odd vent would explode, and downpours of squigs and little terracid buggins, called slippers, or something like that, would roll around on the floor, killing each other. Kronan again swelled with pride, for he could now feel the war around him, between himself and the air vents, his squigs and the buggins, even between himself and the Tryntaflex. It was truly epic. It was almost as if the air was alive with the very vibration of war, which of course it was. Sidebar: Spore Wars. The true oddity of the Orks and the Buggins was that they fought each other even on the microscopic level. For as each of the Orks died, they released a miasma of spores that floated out into the atmosphere, yet they were still Orkoids. And thus, they wanted to not only plant themselves in a warm wet patch to grow, but they were also more than amply enthused with a good brawl. The Buggins, for themselves, also alter the very atmosphere of any location they inhabit. Tiny spores from the terrakids would change the landscape, the air, the very water, preparing all of it for consumption by the Hive Fleet.
So they are fighting at a microscopic level, they're fighting at the macro level included. Yeah, wow.
Hence the two agents in the air, across every surface, Orkoid spores and Buggin bacteria, fought each other viciously. As each Buggin slew an Ork, they added to the strength of the microscopic warriors. Yet, as the Orks marched across the sheep, burning everything in their path, they were destroying the very means of producing reinforcements for this conflict. Thus, with every step they took and every Buggin stack they burnt, the Orks were beating the Buggins back again and again. It was glorious.
A good scrap.
Sidebar over. And so it was. The Kronan knew what he had to do. For this was like the riddle of the boxes. Well, okay, that was a stretch. But it was a conundrum nonetheless. For Kronan knew he could dispatch the Tryntaflex if he ever got in close with the colossal bugger. Yet, to get there would mean taking more than a few shots from the Ork puddle-generating mega shooter that seemed to be growing out of its hands, like a particularly nasty line of snot that comes attached to your finger after a good rubbage.
Ew, no, ew. Yes, I have picked my nose and I do know what he's talking about. But no, this is disgusting. Okay? Ew.
You know, the kind that no matter how you flick, it always just sticks. Hence you have to rub it off on a passing grot or snot. Stringy, you know. Anyway, Kronan did not mess about. He knew 3 things immediately. Number 1, Tiddles would follow him wherever he went.
To death.
Number 2. The Buggin could fire at least twice, probably thrice, if he just hoofed it along the corridor. And 3. He needed to do something soon, as more of his legion were charging in there whilst he deliberated. The pressures of command, eh?
Yeah, but you wanted this.
And so it was that Kronan was molested by another idea. But one he wholeheartedly endorsed this time. It wasn't like the last bunch of ideas from yesterday, or was it the day before? In either case, the idea to make a grot shrinker so he could keep one in his ear for emergency cogitations.
A grot shrinker? No.
Well, it seemed like a good idea at first, but then Kronan remembered that the grots did tend to wee a lot.
And imagine now, this thing is gonna wee on your ears. No.
Thought of a miniature grot peeing in his ear forced Kronan to scupper the plan immediately. Nor was the thought of expanding his fists a good one, if truth be told. For Kronan initially thought that he would be able to hit bigger things, grab and throttle things like those massive kites of the Humies. You know, the ones about the size of a stomper or more.
Oh, is he talking about a dreadnought? Okay.
How he could grab a foot and then use it to smash up other kites. But it dawned on Kronan that this situation would make bogey flicking near impossible. For the thought of having a good nasal cavity clean-out with fingers the size of a Land Raider Crusader, well, it seemed impractical and potentially very ouchy.
Yeah, very dangerous. You probably will kill yourself.
And Kronan did stumble upon the concept of it being, well, a tad sacrilegious, really. For was he not the impressive height and terrifying girth due to the blessings of his god? Was he not exactly the right size for the task Mork had set before him?
Indeed you are.
Of course he was. Hence, the fist beginner was also revoked. Now Isaac Newton and Happy Len were particularly disappointed, so they said that they would make it anyway and use it on Humies. A bit of market research. As ideas went, Kronan saw that it was good. But where were we? Ah, yes. The conundrum of the corridor. Now Kronan was indeed an almost uniquely driven greenskin, and although he understood his pace and import, that the War would literally tear itself apart if he were to fall, and yet he was still an Ork. And he wanted to give the Tyrantaflex the gifts of Mork. Hence his idea made him chortle, and then he gave the order. Within a minute, he had 3 of his legion on either side, each in Meganob armor, of course, and so 2 grabbed an arm and 1 a leg on either side of his bulk, and they began to swing him back and forth in unison. Now to say that the first 6 knobs got this right was a massive overestimation. He did go through 2 entire groups before they got it right.
2 entire groups?
The first being snaffled by Tiddles, who construed them as attacking his lord. But when Kronan had a nice calm chat between Tiddles' nose and the cunning one's fist, he seemed to get the point that his master was in no danger. Well, not from the lifting knobs at any rate. But in any case, the third try was the charm, as the 6 knobs' armor clanked and squealed under the effort, but Kronan was building up a lot of momentum as he was swung back and forth. Then, at his mighty command, they let go. And Kronan slammed into the wall of the corridor, and then slid down it like a toboggan. The oddity of it being that he rolled so that it was his front that was slammed against the wall and floor as he sped like a bullet towards his quarry. He needed to keep his butt as a first line of defense.
Oh yeah, he has a shield in his butt, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Tyrantaflex unleashed a ball of plasmatic death towards our hero. Yet, as it came to destroy him, it smashed against an egg shield of power. The shield took most of the hit, Kronan's mega shiny mega armor absorbing the splash easily. Now, Issue 1 immediately came into place, as Tiddles charged after his master. But when the blast came, the avatar of teeth flashed a brilliant green, then disappeared.
Cool.
Kronan smirked as he slid, his nose being pushed up beyond his forehead at the time as it dragged across the surfaces. Kronan knew that this was the moment he was either a genius or about to become a smoking blancmange. For the Terrorkid trying to flex should surely fire just once more before he struck it. Yet Kronan flew out of the corridor and directly into the thing's back with both feet, his boots smashing into his tail as he screeched to a stop. He looked up to see what he had hoped would happen. For now, the Tryntaflex was tugging and pulling as if its head were about to come off, which is exactly true. For in the desperation of the moment, Tiddles had performed his new party trick and had teleported next to the thing attacking his lord. Kronan stood up and took out his mighty chopper and rushed around the bulk of the buggin. And there he guffawed as he saw the head of the Tryntaflex inside the maw of the avatar of teeth. It had its arms between the jaws of Tiddles and was barely keeping him from finishing his bite, which would tear its head clean off, of course. Tiddles was growling and shaking as he tried to get the buggin to accept his dental delivery. But Tiddles now wagged his tail as one of his tiny eyes watched Kronan come round the buggin. The Tryntaflex hit the ball of teeth with its gun as it could not get it pointed directly at him, but it suddenly went still, for Kronan had beheaded it in one fell swoop. Which was a bit of a shock to Tiddles, really. As Kronan turned to give his pet a swift hug, he saw Tiddles still had crossed eyes from where Kronan's chopper had passed so close to his face.
Oh, Tiddles, don't worry. He'll never hurt you. Kronan will never hurt you. You're his best buddy.
Yet the moment was shattered by the screeching of small gun buggins. They had rushed in to witness the death of the Tryntaflex and unloaded into Kronan and Tiddles. Yet, at this point, there was another roar. For the Black Legion had discerned that their lord was not a smoking pile, hence they had charged down the corridor themselves.
Wah!
The Buggins fired their Barbaras, or something like that, at Kronan. Yet his armour was the finest of Muggins, the most impressive of shiny bits. And also, his butt-held power field generator had recovered. Hence all of the shots bounced off, and Tiddles hid behind his master for but a second, as the Black Legion leapt from the corridor in their scores. They unleashed their shooters into the Barbara gates, and any who weathered the fire were soon dispatched in the best way possible, by chopper action. Well, Power Claw, Boot and Headbutt also, of course. But the point is that they were crushed in close-quarter combat.
And that's what the Orks excel at. Close-quarter combat. Oh, they excel at that.
The only one that truly counted.
Exactly.
And so, the bottleneck had been breached, the dam torn apart. And now Legion knobs and oceans of squigs were pouring forward. Grots too, of course, but they were hardly worthy of the mentioning. Well, apart from the Vidgrots. Alas, things were not as smooth as they could be. But then, where would be the fun if things went as expected? For in the next region, there were whole new buggins to fight. Excellent. For the next few rooms and regions were a messy battle indeed, for none could see more than a few paces in front of them, due to a deep icky fog that permeated the air.
But that's why close-quarter combat is required, it is necessary in these types of situations. They're gonna make it.
The rooms were filled with venom ropes. They had odd fat bodies that had a veritable squid's worth of long tentacles. Although they were not particularly nifty and close, they made everything more challenging. For these wiggly buggins were not the main event at all. They were just hiding the next adventure in battlefield butchery. For out of the muck and mire came an avalanche of utter animals. The Orks were generally moving forward with quite a lot of joviality. The jocularity of the situation was side-splitting, as the greenskins all made wafting movements over their noses, and more than a few attempted to add to the miasma with their own trouser coughs. Alas, in their enthusiasm,
Please do it.
more than a few simply followed through, which of course was loud and squitty and led to even more guffawing. It was in the midst of this silliness that they the buggins struck. The air could almost be seen to move as blood-curdling screams filled it. Now these weren't good, honest, deep-throated Orky screams. These were not bellows of defiance or calls to combat. These were blood-curdling, screeching affairs that made more than a few of the boys cease their laughter. And the buggins came out of the fog like a thunderbolt. Well, if a thunderbolt was about 20 foot tall, spat bioplasmatic death, and had 4 colossally stabby and rippy limbs made of hate.
It's time for a nice good scrap.
And so it was that the stream of fillers barreled into the Ork lines. Yet, were these not Kronan's elite forces, his Black Legion? The massive monsters came in hard, and their initial onslaught was devastating. When Kronan strode forward, his knobs, mobs, and boys came with him. Now, Kronan had not brought Hacknien with him on this particular jaunt, for he was saving that up for a proper fight. For Kronan considered this just a bit of fun, like a
Okay, alright. Save yourself for the main event, I guess.
bouncy castle, whatever that was, but with spikes and randomly appearing lava flows. He would always take a rumble seriously, of course, but he did not really consider this sort of fray that eventful. Well, eventful was not exactly the word, for Kronan had to drop his chopper and shooter to grab 2 of the very pointy talons that the streamer filler before him had managed to get past his reach. Yet he had already shorn off the other 2 from the beast, so he did not mind leaving his gut open. And so it was that Kronan then pulled the arms of the baggin back and broke them like kindling. The thing thrashed as much as a Drukhari at a whipping contest.
A Drukhari in a whipping contest? Oh my gosh.
But Kronan just planted his head into its face until the buggin was just a headless mush on the floor. Now Kronan would have been slain in this event too, as he was getting so into the headbutting that he lowered his guard. Yet his trusty pet saved him once again. As another stream of filler came in, Tiddles jumped on it and bit into its face and upper body. The thing was then dragged down by an avalanche of squigs, who were attempting to help Tiddles, the avatar of teeth.
Yeah, the tidal wave of teeth. That's what it should be called. The tidal wave of squig teeth.
And so it was that the Black Legion also cut and broke, ripped and tore into the Goliaths. They had even more fun with these ones than the corny flexers. And when the waves of the fillers stopped, there was a small groan from the lines of greenskins. Well, more of a moan of, "Oh, is it over already?" type affair. And when the streamers were all dead, they all went on to catch and kill every last one of the squiggly venom ropes. So, with spirits high and weapons wet, Kronan led his forces even deeper into the Terrikid factory. Kronan flicked a quick look at the screens of the Vidgross, just to keep abreast of the progression of the attack elsewhere. Now, Gitsquisher McMurder had a definite lead on Kronan, for he had been in the first wave and not experienced a hold-up to Kronan's forces, as they were previously led by the now smoking boots of Tragic. And so it was that McMurder had passed his own trials. His prong had been engaged by a vast rank of buggin' chopper and blaster gits. Standing just about the size of a knob, these ones seemed more organised, more closely packed and far more stable. Hence, they were packed in quite deep when the Orks hit their lines. The bony swords of the buggin' warriors cut straight through even mega armour, so there was almost a bank of dead Ork boys before the main lines of the buggins. Yet, when McMurder hit their line, they buckled. He was as wrathful as a librarian who has a visit by the Society for whispering slightly too loudly while slowly reading out, but bursting into tears and snot-bubble misery when this is pointed out, no matter how politely. An odd and long-named society, it is true, yet all is possible in the grim darkness of the far future.
Indeed. Anything.
Anyways, McMurder was a thing of pure rage and stabbiness. He swung his power claw like a baton twirler at a parade, and there was nothing but buggin' bits left in his wake. As the greenskins piled into the gap he created, the buggin' block disintegrated. With grots and squigs now covering the floors and ripping at anything not aware of them, the boys took the buggin' blades on their choppers, and the buggins were ripped asunder. At this rate, McMurdo would be at the center of the hive before Kronan. But
Kronan can have that. He cannot have one of his bosses being in one of the first. No. Kronan, you gotta catch up.
But then, things had been so fun, Kronan would not begrudge it, even if he was pipped at the post. But when Kronan attempted to view Grinner the Backstabber's thrust, all he could see were the boys and knobs. It seemed that Grinner and his flash kits had managed to kill every last Vidgrot who had followed the hat-wearing weasel. Kronan had no doubt that it was now between himself and McMurdo, and he was also pretty certain that Grinner would come up with some excuse about being lost in the winding corridors or something like that. Miserable. What kind of an orc was Grinner? Was he an orc at all? Perhaps he was actually a modified Humie.
You know, it's possible he might be an official Assassinorum agent that has just transformed itself, or should I say himself or herself, into an orc. It's possible. I don't know of any other Xeno race that is able to morph themselves into a different type of alien. You know, maybe there are some Astartes, a legion or a chapter that is able to also, you know, morph themselves into different people. But I know the official Assassinorum have those types of abilities. So yeah, it might be an assassin. You know, Backstabber might actually be an assassin waiting for the right moment to kill Kronan. It's possible, but I don't know. I think it's just that hat that's just giving him so much information and suggestions on what he should be doing. And yeah, instead of being a proper orc and just having a proper scrap, he's decided to use unorthodox, plans and procedures. Yeah, definitely Mork is on his side as well. Cunning, brutality.
Something like an arse starter, modified to look like an orc. But then, mused Kronan swiftly, he doubted even an arse starter, a space marine, would avoid crumping to this miserable degree. To Kronan, of all the fathoms ever conceived, this, surely, was the most honourable. For no true orc was ever afeard of crumping, nor, more especially, being crumped. And in some small way, Kronan had the right of the matter. For the orcs did not suffer from the most prevalent and potent of all curses across the entire Warhammer universe. Sidebar. The curse of Hazagorot, the Shiteflinger. Now it is a...
The curse of Hazagorot. Okay.
Well-known self-evident truism that most beings are utterly bowel-liquefyingly terrified of passing their sell-by fate. And by that, I don't mean developing a middle-aged sped or sag, nor becoming a bit whiffy via continence and confidence-eroding accidents and the like, or reaching for something too high in a supermarket and having that twinge that prophesies a week of laying on a couch and dissolving into hot baths to release the discomfort, and looking longingly back to the days when putting on socks was a mere task and not a barely possible trial. No. I refer, of course, to the final and ultimate inconvenience. Passing on, pushing up daisies, pining for the fjords, etc., etc., et al., et al. In a word, death. For it is not as simple as saying that sentience equates to awareness of the finality of it all. In the grim darkness of the far future, the entire galaxy is also labouring under a terrible malady. The curse of Hazagorot, the Shiteflinger. For he was once a godlike being, a Catpan. And he was so brutal, so terrible, that he affected the psyche of all who now dwell in the Milky Way galaxy.
Sure.
And thus, the image of death to many is the very visage of Hazagorot. When the war in heaven was at its very height, he was destroyed, shat into a million pieces by his own slaves, yet his...
So he's a Catan? Okay.
Influence has been so suffocating that all sentient beings now fear his presence, and they fear death. Yet, the Krork, the ancestors of the good and honest Orks, were spared from this horrific psychosis. Now the Smeldar state that they too had no fear of death, but this was because, like the milksops that they are, they knew it would not be permanent. For the Smeldar could reincarnate. Well, they could before the advent of She Who Thrusts, and the Fat One, the Bookie Bird, and the Juice God, of course. Now, without this little get-out-of-purgatory free card, they have succumbed to the curse as well. So, to put a pin in this one, the whole galaxy is scared of an old Catman, who has been shat into a million pieces many millions of years ago.
Call it the Satan Catman. Yeah, right. Oh, wow.
Silly, isn't it? And so, the Orks are not conscious nor scared of any threat to their lives. Well, some are. Like a grot staring at a knob in mid-crumping. Yet this is probably more the wish to avoid pain, not death. But the fear of death does not affect the real Orkoids. Anything larger than a grot. Okay. Well, that leaves Orks and Squiggoths. But the point stands. Orks do not fear death. So they do whatever absolute ridiculousness that comes into their heads, whenever they wish, wherever they wish. Ha ha. Sidebar over. And so it was. The Kronan was again brought back to the affray at hand. For his forces now pushed into a different area entirely. He could feel he was getting closer to the central hub of the Buggins, for they now came out at his forces in a slathering rage.
It's time to finish this, Kronan. Time to finish this scrap.
All pretense at previous subtlety, utterly subsumed in the sheer joy of combat. Or that is how Kronan liked to view it, at the least. Yet, Kronan was in paroxysms of pleasure when he stepped into the next room. For there were these gorgeous Buggins. Things of true wonder. He knew their names. He had seen them on his beloved data slate. But the pics and the description...
He still has that data slate from Acolonia? Wow, he's really taking care of it. And how does he know how to charge the data slate? Exactly. Anyways.
At least this time, had been utterly and woefully incapable of doing it justice. For the hearty flexers before him were lovely.
You know this data slate or tablet that Kronan is in possession of. It's like a Pokemon... What do they call it again? Pokédex. Yeah, it's like a Pokédex. He just has to, probably switch it on and then face the camera at the enemy, and then it recognizes the enemy and tells Kronan about this enemy that he's about to fight. Yeah, probably it's something like that.
With eyes like saucers filled with wonder, Kronan basked in the butchery. He even considered bellowing for one to be taken alive, for what a phenomenal pet it would make.
No, you already have a pet. His name is Tiddles. Don't need another one.
Yet Kronan then looked into the wide eyes of his most beloved, his huge and gnashy Tiddles, the avatar of teeth. What need he for some huge nasty thing to be kept under a trapdoor?
Exactly.
Leading into a pit with this beast underneath. Oh, the fun would be astonishing. Yet how could he replace or supplant his own kin, his own besotted and loyal Tiddles? He found he could not. Hence he decided to do the next best thing and get in on the action. Tiddles waggled his tail as he followed Kronan into the melee. But what was so exciting about the hearty flexers? Well, they were just a cornucopia of crushing and killing. Their body bulk was the size of a corniflex, or perhaps even a Tracygon. But it had two huge crushing claws at the front, and wonder of wonders, a maw filled with tentacles and teeth so prolific it was like looking down into a squig pen at feeding time. But the pièce de résistance was a long tongue that came lashing out and grabbed even knobs and dragged them back into its gob hole.
That kind of reminds me of the Alien movies. You know, the aliens, the xenomorphs with their tongue, with a small little mouth.
Like a massive frog, whatever that was, sitting...
Or a chameleon. Yeah, they also have like long tongues that just collect an insect and then put straight up into their mouths. Yeah.
On a lily pad, swatting juicy flies out of the skies. Kronan was in love. Well, he would have been if the Greenskins had the capacity, which they do not. The trade-off for not succumbing to the curse, one would imagine. Ah well, in either case, the hearty flexers were like a one-beast training machine, for they jabbed out with their tongue, then came at you with their tentacles, all while you had to duck and roll away from the gratuitous crushing pincers in their forelimbs. And Kronan hogged 3 to himself, then went on to share with Tiddles, as they butchered their way through a half-dozen of the monsters. Good times. Good times. Yet, as with all good things, it could not last. For McMurdo was now finishing off his own hearty flexers, meaning he was neck and neck with Kronan now. His power was substantial, but he was no match for the cunning one. Or, of course, the fact that Kronan had the Black Lucian with him.
I think McMurdo's patron god is definitely Gork. You know, brutality, cunning, instead of cunning, brutality. Maybe, yeah.
McMurdo only had boys. Hence, he had
Boys are still good, you know, they have their moments. Maybe he has some commandos with him. Yeah.
taken a bit more time with the stream of fillers and hearty flexor waves. Now the two forces were converging on opposite sides of the main and last region, still held by the Buggins. With a last flick of his eyes over the vidscreens, Kronan could already see the stretcher-bearers of the grots coming into the war zone and rushing out again fully burdened. Now most would think that the stretchers would be for wounded orcs, yet this was not the case. For the grots were already swiping all of the Buggins to chain-gang them to the transports ready for the victory banquet. Their galleys were being fired up all across the War fleet, and the
They're gonna eat the Tyranids. Oh, what a feast. What a feast.
grots did not want to miss out. Hence, they ran like the clappers. And so, we get to the finale. On to the Triant. And
It's time for the biggest scrap.
so it was that Kronan led his forces to the last door. With a monumental effort of his boys, they unleashed Daka like a river into it. Then, when everyone was clean out of ammo and the door was still there, the mega-armoured knobs of the Legion charged the doors, only for them to be bowled out of the way, and, as has been noted before in the Chronicles, Tiddles went at it like a trooper. He bashed at the door and bit into it as much as his teeth would gain purchase. He clawed and spat and gobbled and chomped, and within less than a minute, there was a hole large enough for even the meatiness of the cunning one to simply step through.
Well done, Tiddles. Well done.
Which, of course, Kronan did. The changes in the room were wall to wall, ceiling to floor, as this had been indeed the veritable axis mundi of the Buggins. Everything was sticky and slick with ick. Yet this would not stop the first son of Orquilonia. Oh, no, it would not.
Aqualonia is now called Orquilonia. Okay.
Kronan espied the door burst open on the other side of the room, and there stood McMurdo, panting and grinning. Not like Grinner the Backstabber, of course, with his sly eyes and barely curled lips. Nay, this was a truly toothy, orky grin, the grin of the righteous. Kronan and he locked eyes and raised their blades in salute. This would be a race to the middle. Yes, it would. And so it was that McMurdo and Kronan, Tiddles and all of the knobs, mobs, grots and squigs, all raised their voices and exalted praise as they bellowed. And then they went about the good deed of the day. The death of the last and largest Buggins. For in this last room, the Triant, the big brain Buggins in charge, had surrounded himself with a wall of weird warriors. The main line
Weird warriors? They must be psychers.
were these blind bugs with helmets for faces. They were incredibly heavily armoured and would not budge from their positions in defence of their lord. These were the Triant Guard. Yet around the edges slithered long and lusty Buggins that could tower up on their coils and reach to the very top of the bay. They were huge. These were Targons, or something like that. And so, the Buggins held their ground and fought like really angry wasps when you're about to accost their queen. Like they were exceptionally stabby and bitey indeed. Kronan was forced to ride Tiddles to get the kind of elevation he required to really do some damage to the tall ones, the Targons. He could see his boys all surrounding this last island of Buggins.
You know, I remember the times when Tiddles was not that big compared to Kronan, and Kronan could not ride Tiddles, but now Tiddles has grown up and Kronan is able to ride him into battle. That's just amazing. And he can teleport.
And it was hilarious. There was utter carnage. Yet, he could also see that McMurdo was now right in amongst the Triant Guard. At any moment, he could just take one or two more lucky swings and clear enough space to get at the big Buggins.
Be careful, McMurdo.
Yet, there became time for Kronan, as the big Buggin fired a massive shooter down at McMurdo, and he was forced to roll backwards to avoid being turned into sludge. Of course, the guard of the big bug then closed ranks, and it was as if McMurdo was never amongst them. He was no lickspittle or lollygagger, and he simply brushed himself off and went back in for the kill. Yet, all of his previous effort was wasted, and he was back to square one. Kronan trotted Tiddles back from the main engagement, preparing to charge the line of Buggins. Tiddles seemed to know exactly what was planned, as he dug in his claws a few times to test the purchase he had on the floor. He was preparing to leap, just as Kronan intended.
Does Tiddles have telepathy? Maybe this is also another ability that is developed after absorbing in those mad boys. You know, not only teleportation, but also telepathy. Yeah, okay.
Hence they charged forward, and when Kronan grabbed Tiddles' eyebrow region and dragged it up, the squig did indeed launch himself into the air. Yet something truly amazing happened just as they did. For as Kronan was launched up, he could see a strange square of sparks coming from the ceiling. A square of flames licking around, which then dropped out of the ceiling. It landed directly in front of the Terracid Triant, only barely missing the thing as it hopped backwards out of the way. And there stood before the Buggin, on the square of metal that had been burnt out of the deck above, stood Grinner the Backstabber, and 5 of his Flashkits guard. The Flashkits had formed a semicircle to the back of Grinner.
So is this why Grinner Backstabber was not engaging the Tyranids this whole time? He's been saving up his forces and also understanding the map for him to, be right under or above the Tyranid, and then to surprise it and kill it. Okay, wow. Now, is this Backstabber's plan, or is it the plan of the Hat? That's something that we need to ascertain. And if it's the plan of the Hat, that Hat has got to go. Kronan's authority is going to be tested here because of that Hat. Yeah.
When the whole Buggin line turned to protect their lord, they were, of course, absolutely smashed. Not only by the Flashkits, but also by those with whom they had already been fighting tooth and claw. But Grinner's Flashkits kept them back just long enough for the wretch to leap at the big Buggin. Grinner now exhibited that rage he had displayed in the opening waves of the battle, and Kronan yet again was shocked by the fury of this boss. For Grinner swung his power claw and chopper so fast, they were blurs. And within only a few seconds, the big Buggin was dead. The Triant had been killed. And the battle was over. Well, there was about half an hour of melee raging, as the Buggins went stark staring tonto all over the place when their big bug died. Yet their cohesion was shattered, their lines dissolved. Now it was solitary Buggins here and there being
more food for the celebration,
taunted and torn apart by the boys, or of course the squigs. All the while, Grinner just stood above the dead lead Buggins, with his mighty chopper in hand and the head of the Buggin in the other. Now Kronan had two choices. On the one hand, Kronan was rather knocked off by his missing out on his leap being the end of the affair, and he taking the head of the big Buggins personally. Yet he had the second issue, for he was actually elated. He was more relieved than he had been since he saw Tiddles at the base of the tree of Woohoo, back in the camp of Toothslasher and Toba when all seemed lost. He was that happy. You see, he was a cunning orc, as we know, but he was also a proud orc, as any truly orky orc should be. The previous trust in Grinner had been misplaced, he had thought, and that would not be good. Yet he had not turned out to be a snivelling, grot-hugging coward. The sinking feeling Kronan had when he watched Grinner on the vids had been vile, for he had thought that Grinner was worthless. And, as Kronan had permitted him to be one of his own big bosses, well, that sort of horrific calumny had a habit of being passed from the originator to all those associated with him. And that would definitely mean the cunning one himself. Grinner the Backstabber was different. All knew this. For was he not a freebooter? And they were all known to be a bit touched in their head. So, it seemed that he had adapted to his experiences, was the sum of all he had seen and done. Hence, he had already learned to be nearly as goal-oriented as other runty races.
I'm still trying to ascertain whether it is the influence of the hat or is it just the character development of Backstabber, you know. Yeah, but okay.
Not ideal, Kronan had to concede, yet Grinner was no coward. His blood was as green as the next good orky orc, and he had pulled off a blinder. For none could deny that he had been cunning, and had not Kronan demanded that all of his war consider the application of this dark art as a form of religious sacrament. Well, not that he would have put it that way, but it was true nonetheless.
But this type of cunning is just high level. It's at your level of cunning, Kronan. And you can't have someone at your level of cunning. Because if there's someone at your level of cunning, they will eventually try to overtake your position. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a proper scrap between orcs. You know, if there's someone that wants to challenge your position of authority, let them try. But rather be safe than sorry, you know. So if there's an opportunity for you to nip this situation in the bud before it becomes worse, take it.
And hence, the big Buggins boss and all the little Buggins were now dead. The Squigs and Snots and Grots would hunt down injured or hiding bugs over the next few days. The Orks of Omen was now cleared of all but the greenskins.
Well done.
Kronan had shown his dominance over the Buggins, and of course, over the Orks of Omen itself. For it was now totally, completely, and irrevocably owned by Kronan. Kronan knew in his gut that he could not do what he wanted to do next, and it vexed him mightily. For the urge to stomp up to Grinner and simply commandeer the strange headgear from him was rife. Kronan had to fight the urge with all of his fibre, for Grinner had pulled off a blinder and burst a big Buggin. It would raise all hell if he were to then dishonour this warrior by stealing what was clearly his.
True.
Oh, if it were booty, he could have simply claimed it as a big boss, but let's not get started on booty again. Yet all had seen Grinner in said headgear many, many times before, and it would not do to snatch it now. For better or worse, for at this moment, Grinner was the orc of the hour, and Kronan could do nothing but walk up to him and raise his arm into the air, a sign of the acknowledgement of Grinner's victory from Kronan. Kronan had to reward good effort, never punish it. So the hat, which we of course know is actually the helmet of St. Hungo the Endowed, would have to wait for a more auspicious time. And so it was that Kronan joined the celebration feast with all of his boys, knobs and bosses. Grinner was enjoying his moment in the spotlight, yet Kronan did not begrudge this for him either. To make sure he did not go into a rage and slaughter everyone present in a peak of jealousy, Kronan decreed that the feast would indeed be hatless. Out of sight, out of mind. At least while he was in
Good idea, Kronan. Good idea. Oh wow.
Timing, the Herculean quantities of grog now being wantonly splashed about. It was a good day, and it would lead to many more. For as soon as the War had claimed and stockpiled all of the buggins, it was time to take a tour with his brand new Space Hulk megasheep,
The Orks of Omen.
the Orks of Omen. And Kronan, in his infinite cunning, knew exactly where he wanted to go first.
Let me guess. What is it called again? Ramalana Ding Dong 4.
Coming next time, Kronan and the sentient cyclophone of Ramalama Ding Dong 4.
Yeah, guys. Ramalana Ding Dong 4. Here we come. That's it, guys, with Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer, Kronan the Canon, Legend of Kronan, bug swatting. This was a request from Mitch7235. And yeah, it's good to be back with Kronan. It's good to be back with his horde of orcs. It's good to be back, seeing McMurder, Backstabber, and also hearing about Daka van Smashhoven. Yeah, it's really, really good to be back here with this group of orcs, if I can say that. And also Tiddles, yes. Very, very good to hear that you are also still here. And yeah, Kronan is adapting to his leadership position. He's no longer just the ruler of Aqualonia or Orcalonia. He is now becoming an interstellar, king or war boss, I should say. Yeah, interstellar war boss. Multiple planets are under his authority. Multiple conquests are happening. And, he's multitasking all of these types of situations or war fronts that are occurring within his sphere of influence, if I can say that. And yeah, it's good that he is developing multitasking skills, and he's still relying heavily on Mork, being cunning and brutal instead of being brutal and cunning from Gork. And also in terms of Backstabber having this hat, it's a very serious problem that I hope Kronan can deal with effectively as soon as possible. Because the longer that Backstabber has this hat, the more dangerous, he's going to become. Eventually, all of these wins that he gets are going to get to his head, and he's going to start having thoughts, ideas, ideas about becoming the new war boss, ideas about killing you, Kronan. So you have to deal with this as soon as possible. Yeah, it's also good to hear that they are extremely effective against the Tyranids. Close quarter combat battles, Tiddles with his tsunami, what are they called again? Squigs, yes. His tsunami squigs, just charging at the enemy. And yeah, the Black Legion also being extremely effective against the Tyranids. And yeah, really, the galaxy needs the Orks to, fight against the Tyranids. The other races like the Humies and the Smeldar, and the Tau, they all have their own culture and ethos and standpoint when it comes to war. And it's not the same like the Orks. The Orks have nothing to lose, For them, losing is not fighting. So they enjoy the scraps that they get into. They enjoy the battles that they get into. And, that's what fuels them to stay alive. That's what keeps them entertained. That's what, makes their souls just happy. Because they were designed this way. This is what they were meant to do. So it's good that, it's the Orks who are really fighting back against these Tyranids. And, yeah, we need them. The galaxy needs them. Yes, they are a nuisance. Yes, they might be clownish or funny, but without them, really, the Milky Way galaxy would be in serious trouble. Because you can't really rely on the Necron. You can't. They have got their own political issues that distract them from dealing with galactic problems. So yeah, I know they're trying to deal with the Eye of Terror, but still, it's just not enough. The impact from the Necron is not enough in the galaxy, not yet. And the other races are also not really well funded or equipped, to deal with the Tyranids effectively. Not like the Orks. So yeah, we need them. And yeah, in terms of multitasking in the responsibilities of Kronan, it's very important because there's going to be situations where some Orks land on the same planet but in different locations, and then once they meet up, they're going to start fighting against each other. So definitely, organizational skills are required from Kronan and his bosses. Clean out the bosses that are incompetent and keep the ones who are competent close to you. And yeah, you'll find success, Kronan. You will. But now we're heading off to Ramalala Ding Dong 4. And yeah, can't wait to see what happens next in that video. Wow, really, it's good to be back. But still, there's no opening music. The opening soundtrack. Din, 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 din. Yeah, I missed that. I really do miss that. Hopefully, it will be here in the future videos. Maybe, hopefully. But yeah, that's it, guys. That's it with Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel. Remember, if you want to check out the original video of Legend of Kronan bug swatting as well as Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And thank you again to Mitch7235 for the request. It's good to be back with Kronan Dekanen, and I'll see you guys, I want to say next week, but let's just see. Let's just see. Hopefully it will be next week. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.